Let's speak to Danny Ayalon in Jerusalem. He's a former Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel and former Ambassador to the United States. Thank you for coming on the programme, Your Excellency. Now, there have been more targeted raids by Israel overnight. How might that and the death of a senior Hamas commander change Israel's campaign?
Well, it seems like that the only deterrence they have is they fear for their lives. You know, they are recruiting many suicide bombers and sending them for death. But they pretty much take care of themselves. So by targeting them, not only is bringing justice to them because they're murderous people, but also it's a deterrence. It's a very complex matter, and it takes time.
It is a complex matter, and I know you say you are targeting them, the terrorists, but there have been an enormous amount of casualties from Israeli airstrikes. The UN says aid getting through isn't enough and that people in Gaza feel alienated and abandoned. What do you think civilians there should do?
Well, they should just leave the area. What Israel has done for the last few days is urging them, actually the people of Gaza, to leave all the positions of Hamas. You see that Hamas, ISIS, is perpetrating double war crime because they're targeting our civilians and they're using their own civilians as human shields. So what we're trying to do is separate them. And we have prepared with the international community a safe area for them in the southern part of Gaza. The idea is that they leave to the southern Gaza of Gaza. By the way, just like our own population, you know, in the south is living to the north side. So they are also out of harm's way. So then we can really reach Hamas without fear of hurting civilians.
There have been calls for a pause in fighting to allow aid to reach civilians. Why is Israel opposed to that?
Simply because the aid is being robbed and looted by Hamas, and they're using it for their quote-unquote war efforts. For instance, the UNRWA itself, the UN agency, reported, and they put it on Twitter, that the gasoline for their own purposes was actually taken and stolen by Hamas. So what we're saying is that it has to be kind of a system of verification where everything that goes into Gaza goes to the population and not to Hamas.
As we've reported, more than 1,400 people were brutally killed in Israel by Hamas on the 7th of October. 229 are still being held hostage. We are hearing reports, though, that there's been progress on Qatar-mediated talks on hostage release and ceasefire. So what information do you have on the hostage situation?
Well, in 10 stop, the only one that has some leverage over Hamas is the government of Qatar. The government of Qatar gave them billions of dollars. And again, it was misused. The billions of dollars that Qatar gave Hamas was to rebuild Gaza for their own population. But of course, they built it, their military apparatus, you know, underneath, you know, all the bunkers and command and control centers. The idea here now is to have a total exchange of prisoners. If Hamas is willing to let all the hostages out, and most of them are civilians, 85-year-old ladies and babies, if they're out, Israel will be willing to release all the Hamas prisoners. There are quite a few thousands of them. I think that would be a fair deal. The question is, will Hamas take it?
Can you give us an idea of the timeline of that? We're hearing that it might be happening soon. Are we talking hours? Are we talking days? And how might the release of some hostages then affect Israel's decision-making process in this conflict?
Well, I'm afraid it's going to be days more than hours. I wish it would be hours, but there are intense talks, especially between Doha and Qatar and the Hamas people. If all the hostages are released, it certainly will clear the way for the IDF to go and mop up the bunkers of Hamas, just like the Allied forces in 1945 mopped up the bunkers of Hitler and Nazis.
Danny Ayalon, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for your insights.
Pleasure.